Hello, welcome to 30 Minutes. I'm Rick Anthony. My guest today is no stranger to Radnor Studio 21. Barbara Clement has been a favorite guest of mine over the past couple of years, as well as others who host shows here at Radnor Studio 21. Why? Because as an author, she's a master of suspense and intrigue in a mainliner series of mystery novels that grab you, hold you, and make you wonder whether or not you know some of the characters, particularly if you live along the main line. The latest of her series, The Pillar of Salt and Shadows. Welcome back, Barbara, to 30 Minutes.
It's really good to be here, Rick. Thank you for inviting me.
Always a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you.
You've had a fascinating life, and the things we're not allowed to talk about, and we'll explain that. But for someone who came late to your career as an author, you've become a prolific writer. This is 4 and 5?
This is 4 and 5, and I'm working on number 6 right now.
Number 6, and probably you'll start on number 7.
I hope to, yes.
Next month or so. What does this wellspring of creativity come from?
You know, it's very interesting. I don't know. I'm a spiritual person in terms of what I think life is all about. And I found that for these two books in particular, they deal with subject matter that when I started writing them 2 or 3 years ago, weren't really in the news very much. And then suddenly when I finished them, they just pop. Shadows, of course, which is the most recent writing, is about the art that was looted during the Nazi era. And I just found the subject very interesting. There was something about it that really tickled me. Having worked for Estee Lauder, I knew the Lauder men, Leonard Lauder and Ronald Lauder. They were both prolific, or are prolific, art collectors. And Ronald especially, who was an ambassador to the United States ambassador to Austria a number of years ago. And when he was there, he was literally blown away by the fact that so many of the art treasures that were taken from the Jews during late 1930s and early World War II times were still in the possession of the Austrian government, despite the fact that they knew who they were. Something about that just kind of started to spin, and I began to wonder, why is this the case? So I did a little research on it, and boy, did I learn a lot. I was shocked. Finish the book, get it to the publisher, and boom, everything seems to explode. There's a movie out now, Woman in Gold. I don't know whether you've seen it, but it's one terrific movie. And of course, there are all sorts of other topics out that this gentleman, not a gentleman, an old man who was a naughty old man, whose father was a Nazi, collected all of this art, which he died with finally in his Austrian apartment. But I think the key to a lot of this is that with knowledge and with public knowledge of this, maybe we can change a few things.
And what was the inspiration for The Pillar of Salt?
Well, The Pillar of Salt takes place obviously in the Middle East, which is a place that I'm interested in as well, and has always been a place that's fascinated me. But in particular, Iran. Iran is a very interesting place. I've been there once, and that was way back in 1967 when the Shah of Iran had a 2,500th anniversary for Persepolis. And at that time, I looked at this civilization, I thought, wow, this is really something. What strikes me is how really intelligent these people are. But I think that there is so much that goes on in the political life of a nation like Iran and its dealings with someone like the United States that nobody ever knows about.
That's right.
And unfortunately, what I take up in this book are some of the mysteries that are probably part of that liaison.
I may have mentioned this to you before, but I am of Lebanese ancestry.
I didn't know that.
You didn't know that?
No.
Well, of course.
I thought you were Italian.
Everybody does. At any rate, it has been my contention that the East will always have the advantage because we don't understand the way their minds work.
Exactly.
It's not just inscrutable, but they're wired differently. Obviously, they have a much different perspective on life.
Yes.
And on history, and on, for want of a better word, I guess, destiny. Completely different. And so when we sit, I wonder about the negotiations that are going on now. So we sit on this side of the table, they're sitting on the other side, and once again, we hear in the newspapers that they're reaching some kind of accord. I don't believe it. Forget about the politics, but just because we don't understand the way their mind works.
We don't.
And they take the long view.
Absolutely, and there's a naivete, I think, on the part of a lot of Americans in terms of language.
Yes.
Farsi is a very, very, very difficult language, and the innuendos of some of the words are not probably even possible to translate
right.
into English. So when you sit down to negotiate with someone, you may say that you want your coffee warm, and warm to us may be lukewarm or almost cold to him, which is an entirely different type of a situation.
No, it's fascinating. So, well, your appreciation of and your understanding of those nuances and the cultural differences came out of your experiences that you're not allowed to talk about when you were with Estee Lauder, I think, as well as when you were a correspondent?
Well, let's put it this way. They lasted a very long time, from the time I was very young until the time I finished with Estee Lauder, yes.
Yeah, You were traveling the globe when you were with
I
Estee
traveled,
Lauder?
yes, I did. I was in charge of all public relations for Estee Lauder brand outside of the United States.
Sounds like a dream job.
It was a dream job. It's a dream job for someone who isn't interested in ever getting married. I mean, if you want to be an old maid, get this job. I was married, as you know, late in life. So 165 countries, even if you travel once to them once a year,
Yeah.
is a lot of traveling. And it's fascinating. You meet a lot of very, very interesting people. It is also extremely wearing.
Yes.
And it gives you no social life whatsoever.
No, the fun has got to be gone the second or third time.
Well, it goes pretty quickly.
Yes, yeah.
But the life is fascinating because you really do learn a lot.
But it was the richness of those experiences
Yes.
that created the basis for much of what you write now, the background, yeah.
Well, the thing is that when I do write, Rick, and having been to a lot of these places, I see them. In Pillar of Salt, for example, there is a whole section on this little Iranian section.
Yes.
And the way that it looks, which are these cave dwellings. These are houses that people thousands of years ago built by digging out by hand
Yes.
these caves. They're still there. I've been in them. I know what they felt like, and I was just amazed at how wonderfully these people really live. I mean, they've got their own refrigeration, they've got their own fresh water, and it's a protective system. They can go in and keep themselves protected from the government, because the government does come through and fortunately kills them off.
But since you
frequently.
don't travel there now and haven't
No.
for some time,
No.
how do you keep up with
A lot
what
of it is
the imagery
reading.
is supposed to
Well,
look
the
like?
imagery doesn't change. That's I guess part of the good thing about being in a place like
Yeah.
that. These people have lived there for thousands of years. They're probably going to live there for another thousands of years. They don't have a Toll Brothers to build their communities. They just are there, and they still farm. They still have their sheep and their goats, and that really is a continuing lifestyle that's passed on from father
Yes.
to son.
Yep. Your fourth and fifth, Pillars of Salt, and Shadows, in quick succession. Is it more difficult now or easier since you've got this momentum going since you started in
Yes.
2009?
2008, really, right
2008?
after. Yes.
Right after you retired from Villanova?
Immediately, 2 weeks after I started writing the
Excuse me.
first book.
2 weeks. Oh, I remember that story. You woke up one morning and you said,
I've got to do something. I'm going to write.
is it easier now than it was then, or do you still get that feeling, as I do anyway, and I'm certainly not as prolific as you are, looking at that screen and say, oh my God, I've got to get the first 5 words out, and hopefully that'll get me on a roll?
It's a very weird process. In the first place, I get a kind of a feeling about what I want to write about before I start the next novel. In one case, in the case of Vortex of Secrets, was it, or Legacy of Deceit? I think it was Legacy of Deceit.
Legacy of Deceit was the first one.
Was the first one,
First one,
yes. That was written about my father-in-law, and I shouldn't say that, but so much of what he was part of that book, and he had passed away, and we had been going through his papers, and I thought, my gosh, I mean, the man was fascinating. He really was a very, very interesting man. I got to put this down in a book, and that was the first one. So I mean, that came very easily. I think it was the third book that I went out one day when my husband was traveling to pick up the newspaper at the end of the driveway, and there was this flyer newspaper, you know, these things that
Yes.
have all ads.
Yes.
But on the front page of this paper was the story of these bodies that had been found at Immaculata College.
Oh, yes.
Do you remember
Yes,
that?
yes, I do.
Right.
Yep.
Okay, so that became the inspiration for Vortex of Secrets. Now, the interesting part for me about that is that Charlie's great uncle, Martin Withington Clement, who was the president of the Pennsylvania Railroad, is the one who found the bodies way back in the 1920s. Now, that newspaper has never been delivered to me again. Have no idea
How about
how
that?
in the world
Yeah.
we ever got it. But there was his name, Martin Withington Clement. There was the fact that these bodies were found. And I thought, wow, bodies on the main line, that sounds like a good subject to write about. And that became the basis for that story.
Every one of your books is based on the main line,
Oh, they're all,
within the
yes.
context of the
They're
main line?
all based on the main line.
Was that, did you have that in mind as you started to write, or did that evolve, that this is an inexhaustible supply of material?
Yes, it is definitely inexhaustible. It evolved after the first book. Because I thought, you know, this is really fascinating. And the idea of Manellas, for example, in the first book, I love Manellas. I mean, anybody who knows me knows that I love their cherry pie too. So that makes its way into the book. And when we mention places there, they're usually places that I've been or
Yes.
have been with friends of mine.
Of course, the university.
Yeah.
Villanova.
Oh, yes. Of course, the Magic University. Everyone said the Edmondites. Could they be anyone that we know? And I said, this is my own order of Edmondites.
Why were these two books written in such close proximity, one right after the other?
Well, they were really written a year apart. But my husband was very ill during
of course,
one
yes.
part of the writing, and I just could not. I couldn't properly spend time publicizing them
Yes.
because I just didn't have the time to do. So my publisher was very nice and said, "We'll launch both of them at one time." I appreciate that. Thanks, Kevin.
I know you're a spiritual person. You mentioned
Yes.
that before. Do you believe that there is a paranormal force of some kind that directs your writing, guides your writing?
In some ways, yes. I mean, I don't want to sound like a kook, you know, and I know that there are a
No.
lot of kooks out there that I don't have an angel whispering in my ear. But indeed, I really do. I think there is. I mean, there are times when I'm saying to myself, if I could only find information on blah, 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 blah.
Right.
And all of a sudden, there on the screen, I find a reference that I can go to.
Yes.
And there it is. Some of this material I had to dig deeply for, but I found it in the most incredibly obscure places that I ordinarily would not have looked for it, and suddenly did. So I do think that there's something on top of normal activity that goes on with this kind of writing. Also, I do meditate before I write. And I just kind of keep silent and say a prayer and just say, you know, please give me the guidance to write well. I don't write malicious stuff. I don't like that. I don't write gossipy. And these books are clean enough that your friends, the nuns, can and do read. And I think it's really important because there's so much junk out there today that you
I
just,
totally agree with you. Yeah.
you know, I wouldn't want to give to anybody.
Tell us about the heroine who moves from book to book to book.
Yes, from Jessica.
Yes.
She leads a
Jessica
very
Rollins.
Jessica Rollins. She leads a very exciting life, and her
Is she a real person someplace?
well,
Obviously
not
a composite,
exactly.
composite.
Composite, yes, she is. I have to say, I put a little bit of myself into it. Think of myself as doing a lot of these things, but the others, Carolyn and Philip, are a little bit based on our cousins, and Kimberly and Peter. And we have a lot of fun with that because people will come up and say, "What about Buster? Who's Buster?"
Yes.
And the other cousins say, "We don't want to be Buster." But anyway, they're all a part of it, and of course there are places here, as I said, that we all go to, so they're seen around.
If one of the five, or maybe it'll be the sixth, were to be selected for a film, so a producer contacted you or an agent and said, "We're going to do this," Which one would it be? That may be a hard choice.
It is a hard choice. I'd say probably it would be Shadows. Although the new one that I'm writing is called Visions, and that's about a pope who has visions.
A what?
A pope.
That's what I thought you
A
said.
pope. So it takes place in the Vatican, and poor Jessica, the things that she has to go through in order to get herself into the Vatican, scrubbing floors.
A contemporary pope?
Yes.
Oh, really?
Oh, yes.
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh, exactly.
Uh-huh.
Lots of intrigue there, international intrigue.
When will that one, when is it
Well,
targeted?
I'm still writing, so
Okay.
probably not for a year or so.
Okay, won't be ready for the Pope's visit.
Not yet.
In September.
Yes.
So which one would it be? It would be Shadows?
I think it would probably be Shadows. Well, it's the one that I worked hardest on in terms of getting everything right. There's a whole historical section in there about, of course, King Ludwig. And King Ludwig, difficult thing to say, as we all know, was an Austrian king. He was one of the last of the major kings at the turn of the century. And he lived in this immense estate, which is still in existence, and which I went to visit with my husband. You have to get a special pass to go to this place, but it's well worth signing the papers and vowing that you'll not take anything. It's amazing how much stuff is still out there if you really want to look for research on stolen art and things like that. In this book, of course, I take it a step further and use fantasy to find some of these things. But there's no doubt that many of these people, like this King Ludwig, actually did prepare the European scene for what turned into Nazism. And it's intriguing on one level, and on another level it's totally frightening, because if we really were to examine what's going on in today's politics in Europe,
Yes.
what in the world are we doing? Why don't we ever learn anything? And there's also one section in there on a place called Oradour-sur-Glane, which I tend to talk about a lot because it's called the Village of the Martyrs. And it was in this village, really toward the end of the war, that a group of French, well, actually they were German-speaking French, had been moved from Strasbourg to this area. And most of them were doctors, many of them were not Jews, and they were living there in what they thought were very peaceable conditions. But one day, the Germans came in and they killed all of them. They herded the women into a church, threw bombs, gasoline bombs in, and burnt women and children. They herded all of the men into a barn. I think it were 3 men that escaped and survived, 3 young men. The village was never rebuilt. There is a museum there. They never talk about it, and no one has ever found out why they burned it. Of course, in Shadows, I speculate as to why, which is a pretty shocking speculation. But there are really amazing things, and I think talking about a movie, I mean, my goodness, that would be a fabulous movie to go to places like that.
I'm sure it'd be the best choice. On the other hand, the one you're currently writing
Yes.
sounds like it could
It
be
would be really fun,
a
too,
candidate
yes.
as well.
Yes.
Yeah. A friend of mine has written his first novel, An Augustinian Priest,
Yes.
as a matter of fact. And he tells me that the way he prepared, he had written before, but not a novel, mostly spiritual writing. That he took a number of writing courses and practiced until he felt he was comfortable with having developed his own style. It's a relatively short book. It's not, most of yours are about the same.
Right, they're about
Yeah,
300 and
right.
some pages,
He's
right?
I think just over 200. But the point was, it was an arduous process for him. Once he got into it, he said, and in fact, if you read his book, and others have made the same observation, each chapter is almost like a scene in a film.
Yes, yes.
He writes that way. It's contained and moves on.
As a matter of
And
fact,
obviously
as
there's
do I.
continuity.
As do I.
As do you, yes. You write short chapters.
Yes.
Yeah. And one easily moves into the other. The point that for him, it did come to, he obviously had some talent, but he had to prepare for it. You did not have to prepare for it because you've been writing most of your career.
I've been writing most of my
professional
life.
writing.
I mean, my first book was when I was, I think, 4 years old.
Oh,
I had a
really?
sister who was 2 years younger than I am, or unfortunately, she's passed away. But I used to write and color pictures to accompany my book. And when my mother taught us to read very early. And so I've got kind of tired of the same old books. It was during World War II. There weren't a lot of kids' books around. They weren't using paper for books either. So we had to make our own. So I made my own storybooks and wrote them for my sister. But I never felt writing was difficult. When I was in high school, I was the first girl editor-in-chief of the newspaper, but I couldn't be. I had to share it with the sports editor, Tom Squire, because in those days they didn't allow girls to be editors of newspapers. But it was something that came easily, and I never felt as if I had to work at it. And the stories are just fun stories to tell.
Do you get better?
I hope so. I think so.
Can you tell?
I do. There are some times when I struggle not to be kind of plebeian. In other words, it's very easy to take a storyline someplace that a lot of people would go. And what I have to always slap myself about and say, you're not everybody. You're not going to go down that, everybody goes down. What if, and go in that direction instead. And that has to be a rational decision to move in that direction. Because many writers, if they're just and allowing their imagination to go, will travel the road that is easily traveled. I think, again, because I think many of the books out today are trashy, I think that's the problem with a lot of modern literature. Sex is easy to write for some people, not for me, but for many people, and so they just fill it all up, sex, and there it is.
Do you write towards your final chapter? Do you know the outcome?
Never.
Never?
I never do. And that is another part of the magic of writing. Even when some of these characters are introduced, in this new book, the other day I was writing along, and this person, Dr. Roberto Succi, comes into the picture. And I thought, who in the world is Roberto Succi? And then I find out somewhere as I'm writing along who Roberto Succi is. And it turns out that somewhere in my book, he's going to have an important part to play, and I'm not really even at this point sure why he's there, but he'll be there in some form or another.
I'm not sure how to ask this question, but the one you're working on, well, any of them for that matter, how much of the story is based on historical fact, and how much of it is fiction?
Well,
Am I making this up?
It depends on the book. Shadows, a lot of fact. When I
That's got to be harder.
It is, but that's the interesting part. When I'm in Paris in Shadows, or when Jessica's in Paris, she goes to the Jeu de Paume, she goes to the Louvre, and it's there that she learns all about these paintings which were picked up by the Nazis, which are stamped on the back that say Nazi on them, and that people say, but that belonged to Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so, and their children are still living. Why can't you get them back to them? The Jeu de Paume, it was packed with paintings that Hitler put there. That was where they had the Great Fire. And yet at the same time, people today almost ignore the historical fact that most of the paintings of the Jeu de Paume are still stolen art. And I think that's really kind of an amazing thing.
Is that litigation, if that's the word, still going on?
Yeah, it is. In fact, the other night, I didn't go, but a friend of mine went to the Alliance Française in Philadelphia, and they had an attorney there whose name I can't recall right now, but who gave a lecture on the difficulties in returning this art. And the biggest difficulty, which comes up in Shadows too, is taxation. Yes. If you, let's say that your ancestors had art that was stolen, and suddenly part of this collection of Austrian art, it turns out it's Rick Anthony's great-grandfather's painting here, and that painting, if it goes up at Christie's, is worth $25 million. So you say, oh, great. So you want to have that. Well, Uncle Sam's going to come around, and he's going to say to you, Rick, that $20 million painting, before you get it, we want you to put down a down payment on your taxes of $5 million. Oh, God. And you say, what do you mean? I don't have $5 million. Tough luck, then you don't get the painting. Or you've got to sell that painting. So it isn't as if you can say, well, that painting belonged to great grandpa and I'm
Yeah.
going to take it and hang it over the fireplace. You can't do that these days. And many people have unfortunately had to sell the painting or give it to a charitable, museum or something as a charitable donation. And so even if it's discovered, it isn't really
good news,
to
bad
your,
news.
it's good news, bad news,
Yeah.
absolutely.
I had no idea.
Yeah, nobody does. And the taxation, and the Austrians are using it, the Germans are using it, and the Swiss, who are really good at money, are using it par excellence because they don't want to give any of that stuff back. They got their museums. Why should they want to give it back?
Well, to give it back is also an acknowledgement
That
of-
it's,
yeah.
well, but I mean, most people, if the art detectives, and did you know we had a place in Philadelphia, FBI?
I remember you telling me that
Yeah,
last
yeah,
time. Yes,
yeah,
the
yeah.
only one of its kind in the
In
country.
the country, yep, but it's now I think 15 people, and they recently returned one of the paintings that was stolen from the Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston. But at any rate, we know a lot where a lot of these paintings are. It's just a matter of, unfortunately, trying to get through the tax situation and
That's
legal
terrible.
aspects
I have no
of it.
idea. Do you have any idea of how widely dispersed your readership is?
Well, only
What kind
because
of feedback do you get?
only because of friends. I have some in France, but those are my French friends, and
Yes.
so what Amazon will say, "Oh, we had orders from France for these books." I'd like to think that they would go further. I know they go to Canada. I mean, and probably a few other English-speaking places, but I'm pretty much East Coast right at this point.
And mostly up and down.
Up and down, right?
I understand. Little
Yes.
Birdie told me that you're going to be on the cover of Mainline Today.
Well, I don't know if
coming
I'm
up.
on the cover, but I'm inside.
Well, you should be.
Well, thank you. I'm in July issue of Mainline Today magazine.
A feature.
It's Best of Mainline.
Yes.
So we had a
Oh,
nice
that's
interview.
Great. That's
Yes.
terrific. In the July issue,
The
upcoming
July issue, which is coming up.
All right.
And I'm told that this is the best read and most purchased magazine
Yeah,
of the
it
year.
is. Yeah, they've got great circulation. They do a great job.
They really do.
Yeah. I think I know from our previous conversations and what you've shared with me when we've gone to some of the signings that, okay, you're working on the 6th.
Yes.
Do you know what the 7th will be already?
No.
You don't?
I have no idea. No
No?
idea. Someday,
just pop into
it'll
your mind?
pop into the mind, and as did Visions. I can't tell you where Visions came from, other than the fact that I can tell you specifically, it is not about Pope Francis,
All right.
but it's about a mythical pope, Leo the 14th, and this Leo the 14th. As it's being revealed very gradually, has some very incredible things in his background. And
Powers, you mean, or history?
history, more history, yes.
Not a good history.
Well,
You're
you
not
have to
gonna
read
give
the
it
book.
away.
I'm not going to, not yet. You got to read the book.
Okay. Let me go back to the film for a minute, because there's
Yes.
no question one of these is going to be a film. It's just a matter of when, I'm sure. And if I can help with that, please let me know.
Oh, thank
We're
you.
working with the priest,
Yes.
because I believe his book will end up as a film. Where was? Oh yeah. So who would play Jessica if Shadows were made into a film?
Oh, that's really a hard one, because I'd
You
once.
must fantasize.
Oh, I sort of, and some days I see Helen Mirren, but then I think, oh, she's probably a little bit too English and a little bit too sophisticated for it. You need somebody who's kind of lively, and at the same time, she isn't flashy. You can't have anybody flashy in that particular part, because there has to be, essentially, she's playing a lot of different roles. And it really is hard to think about an actress that might...
Think about it. I'll ask you again when
Okay.
we come back. The two books, two current, are the Pillar of Salt and Shadows, and they are available on Amazon.
Amazon.com and through ksquarepress.com.
Terrific. Always a pleasure.
Oh, Rick, it's fun to be here.
Be
Thanks
well.
so much.
Until next time, this is 30 Minutes. I am Rick Anthony. Check them out. They're the latest and greatest from Barbara Clement.